Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is a build guide for Hunter, and it's probably one of the strongest ones I've ever made. The reason I say that is not only because of the tons of damage boosts we have for our Praxic Blade, but also the great survivability that this setup has, with access to stuff like Devour for instant health regen on kill, and a constant 99% damage resistance. I think the background gameplay more than speaks for itself. Let's jump right into the subclass and go over how to make this build. On to Prismatic. For your super, go with Deadfall Tether. The main reason behind this is because it has the most compatibility out of all the other supers with the seasonal artifact and the effects of the Praxic Blade. In addition, it also helps us boost our damage the most by allowing us to have a 35% debuff attached to it. This 35% debuff is new to Tether as it got buffed going into Renegades, and it allows it to be the highest generalized debuff in the game. So in terms of boosting our damage, boosting our survivability, and just being an all-around really decent super for the playstyle, Deadfall Tether is best. For your abilities, go with Acrobat's Dodge just to grant you Radiant whenever you activate your class ability. The basic reason for this is just simply to boost our weapon damage even further, specifically with our Praxic Blade. For your melee, it actually doesn't matter which melee you go with. I have Snare Bomb just for an easy debuff, and especially it works really well with stuff like Repulsor Brace on a secondary weapon just to get a free Void Overshield. But really, you can use any melee here. You're not going to be using it often because you're mainly using your Praxic Blade with this setup. So you can honestly pick whichever one you want here. It really doesn't change the build at all. For your grenade, go with Duskfield Grenade. And the main reason behind this is its compatibility with our exotic armor of choice, which I'll get into a little bit later. But it is very important that you specifically pick Duskfield here. For the aspects, I'm going with Threaded Spectre and Ascension. Ascension is an obvious pick for PvE. It gives you instant amplified and jolts nearby enemies when you use your class ability in the air. And yes, this also works with Acrobat's Dodge, meaning it also makes us radiant when we cast it. In addition, we're also using Threaded Spectre to act like a sort of pseudo-invis effect. Threaded Spectre will draw aggro for a bit from enemies, and when combined with Ascension, it basically makes all nearby enemies just look straight up and shoot into the air, which means that it actually works really nicely with this playstyle because we don't have to constantly reproc Invis and go out of it to attack in this setup. We can just have Threaded Spectre draw aggro for an extended period of time and then constantly attack with our Praxic Blade. Again, it basically works like a pseudo-invis effect, and since we can't take advantage of the other effects that Stylish provides, it's just flat out better and also gives us an additional fragment slot. Onto the fragments, the first one is Facet of Hope, giving us faster class ability regen anytime we have an elemental buff, which can be Devour, it can be Radiant, it can be a Void Overshield. We have a lot of different elemental buffs that we have active all at the same time to rapidly boost our class ability regen. We're also using Facet of Purpose, which gives us a Void Overshield anytime we pick up an Orb of Power, again playing into the survivability aspect of this setup by giving us additional HP and tons of damage resistance. The next one is Facet of Protection, which just gives us more damage resistance anytime we're surrounded by combatants, and when you're Transcendent, this damage resistance is increased. The damage resistance coming from this is around 30% while Transcendent, so again, this stacks with everything else I talked about earlier, which I'll get into a full breakdown whenever we talk about the armor and the exotic that we're using. I'm also using Facet of Grace to give us bonus Transcendence energy anytime we deal damage with our kinetic weapon. And since we're using the Praxic Blade all the time with this setup, this massively improves our Transcendence regen. And the final fragment I'm using is Facet of Balance. And the main reason for this is to help regen our Duskfield Grenade whenever we throw it. Anytime we defeat targets with light-based damage, it gives us melee energy. Anytime we defeat targets with darkness-based damage, it gives us grenade energy back. And simply by throwing our Duskfield Grenade, we can often freeze a few enemies, and if they die from the shatter damage, this is a very easy way to get a ton of grenade energy back very quickly. Next up, onto the seasonal artifact, and we're actually benefiting from a ton of perks with this setup, so let's go over them. The first perk is Elemental Siphon, which anytime we get rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon, it'll generate an elemental pickup matching our super, which play into regenerating our class ability back a bit faster, which is always good for this setup. I'm also using Gravitic Voltaic Charge, which allows us to carry an additional stack of armor charge anytime we have an arc or a void super. So with Tether, we can carry an additional stack of armor charge for free. I'm also using Kinetic Synthesis, which anytime we deal sustained damage with a kinetic weapon, it basically regens its own ammo and gives additional special and heavy ammo progress. When combined with the Praxic Blade, this basically lets us regen more ammo than we're using, allowing us to have infinite ammo with this setup. Next up is Armor Smith. Anytime we break a combatant shield, we get an increase to our damage resistance and our melee damage. The next one is Power from Pain, which rapid final blows against weakened targets give us Devour. This is another way we boost the survivability of this setup by getting health on kill through Devour, and we intrinsically apply weakening with our Praxic Blade because we have a Void super equipped. The next one is Singularity Blade, which while we have a Void buff, our melee and sword hits weaken targets, and final blows create a weakening burst. Now, our sword already weakens intrinsically, but the main reason we're using this is for that weakening burst, which pairs really nicely when combined with Void Infestation. When defeating a weakened target, it spawns a tracking projectile that weakens other targets. So this is a very good chaining effect that allows us to have an AoE burst anytime we get a sword kill that weakens nearby targets, which also releases additional weakening seekers, and again, our sword can intrinsically weaken on hit. The final two mods I'm using are Combination Argent Blade, which is a free damage boost for a Praxic Blade when we use it in a certain way, and Swordstorm Combo, which is a free AoE damage effect anytime that we use Praxic Blade in the 3 light attack, 1 heavy attack combo. These work really nicely when combined with the weakening effects because again, it's just simply boosting its damage through a debuff and a buff. And for Swordstorm Combo specifically, it works really nicely with our Duskfield playstyle because any enemy within our Duskfield not only deals reduced damage while we have a ton of damage resistance on top of that, but they're also getting damage from this AoE effect, which again is further enhanced by them being weakened because of stuff like Void Infestation. Next up, onto the armor. For our helmet, I have 2 stacks of Kinetic Siphon, just to give us a potent orb of power periodically as we get kills with our Praxic Blade. In addition, I'm also using Dynamo just to give us a little bit of super energy back anytime that we use our class ability. For our gauntlets, I'm using a stack of Fastball to increase our grenade throw distance, and 2 stacks of Bolstering Detonation, which will give us class ability energy back anytime that we cause damage with our grenade. And with our grenade being Duskfield, it's very easy to apply a ton of damage ticks over time, giving us a ton of class ability energy. Onto the chest piece, we have 2 stacks of Health Font. This will give us plus 40 health anytime that we have a stack of Armor Charge. This works really nicely with the Praxic Blade, because not only can our Praxic Blade heal us intrinsically, but it also generates orbs of power periodically with Kinetic Siphon, which allows us to get even more health because of our increased to our health stat then. And then I'm also using a stack of melee damage resistance. The main reason for this is just that since we're using a sword-focused playstyle, having damage resistance up close when we're fighting enemies is most important. Onto our legs, the first one I'm using is Stacks on Stacks, which gives us an additional stack of Armor Charge anytime we pick up an Orb of Power. And with the artifact, we can hold up to 4 stacks intrinsically. In addition, I'm also using 2 stacks of Kinetic Weapon Surge, just to give us a 16% damage bonus to our kinetic weapon. So again, with Praxic Blade, not only do we have the artifact perk massively boosting its damage, it can intrinsically apply its own 15% weakening effect, and we get Radiant from our subclass. So yes, its damage is actually very impressive for being just a basic special weapon. Finally, onto our exotic cloak for today, we have the specific combination of Spirit of Renewal and Spirit of Katarkany. I doubt I'm pronouncing that right, forgive me if I'm not. But basically, if you don't have this specific role, I highly recommend you go and get it. Whether that's from Dual Destiny or waiting for Xur to come around or whatever, this role is perfect for this build. The reason for this is that anytime we throw our Duskfield grenade, it does a few things for us. The first is Spirit of Katarkany instantly activates, giving us Woven Mail, which is a bunch of damage resistance. The other thing is that anytime we enter our Duskfield grenade, it'll slowly give us stacks of Frost Armor. In addition, any enemies within our Duskfield also get a reduced 50% damage output. This basically means that the enemies within our Duskfield are dealing half the damage they otherwise would to us, and we're getting constant stacks of Frost Armor, and we have Woven Mail. So, in short, as long as we are in our Duskfield grenade, and the enemy we're fighting is in the Duskfield grenade, they cannot kill us. It doesn't matter if it's a boss, if it's a champion, if it's a tormentor, whatever. If we are both within our own Duskfield, they cannot kill us anymore. For the actual perks on our class item, I'm going with 2 stacks of Class Font just to max out our class stat as high as it can go, as well as a stack of Powerful Attraction, which finally works with Ascension, allowing us to pick up any nearby orbs of power anytime that we activate our class ability. Onto the stats for this build, they're a bit unconventional because we don't actually want to max out anything with this setup, and because of the way that the armor archetype system works, we have to invest in a few different stats that don't typically go well together unless you get super lucky. So the first thing we want to do is grenade. Make sure your grenade stat is at 100. It doesn't need to be any higher than that, but make sure it is at 100. The simple reason with a 100 grenade stat is to get our Duskfield back as fast as possible. Besides that, I would also recommend investing in your super just to get your tether back again as fast as possible. You don't need to go above 100 for either your grenade or your super because your Duskfield isn't really there for damage, so any kind of damage bonus is really pointless. And tether, again, you're not really using for damage from tether specifically, so investing in more than 100 doesn't make sense either. Besides this, you also want to invest in your class ability. Now this is one I would recommend getting as high as you can, even above 100. In short, up to 100, it gives you a reduction in your class ability regen, and above 100, you get an overshield when you activate Ascension, which scales based on how many stat points you have over 100. So with our setup, this improves your survivability even further, which is why I'm using 2 stacks of class font just to try to get this as high as possible. So again, unless you have a specific role on a specific archetype of armor, investing in these 3 specifically is a bit challenging, but it is worth it. Now, I actually do have much better armor with that specific stat distribution, but the main reason I'm not using it is because of the gear set bonus. Now, normally I don't talk about gear set bonuses with my builds just because they're kind of just dependent on your playstyle, and if you customize a build a certain way, you might not benefit from a gear set bonus in a way you otherwise would. And typically their effects are decent, but nothing too great that you have to use a specific gear set bonus. This is the one time in my build guides I'm going to tell you to grind out specific gear set bonuses because they are worth it with this setup. The main ones you want to look for are either the Swordmaster perks, which you can have all 4 of, and if you're only going to go with the 2-piece bonus like I have, you also want to use the Tech Sec bonus. The reason for Swordmaster is that anytime you damage targets with a sword, it exhausts them. And exhaustion is an additional 25% damage reduction to outgoing damage. You can use a 4-piece armor set bonus from Swordmaster if you want to. The main reason I'm not is because we just don't need more damage resistance with this build. However, the 2-piece bonus from the Swordmaster set is fantastic because it lets us apply exhaustion all the time to different enemies, because we won't always have our dust field to do that kind of damage reduction effect for us. But with the 2-set bonus, we can just simply apply it by dealing damage with our Praxic Blade. And then for the other 2-piece armor set bonus coming from Tech Sec, you deal significantly increased kinetic damage to combatant shields, overshields, vehicles, and constructs. After some testing, I found that a 2-piece set with Swordmaster and a 2-piece set with Tech Sec is just simply the best, because again, we really don't need even more damage resistance coming from the Swordmaster set. Finally, onto the weapons, and of course the main one we're using is Praxic Blade. Now for your Praxic Blade, there's a ton of customization you can do with this exotic. The main things I would recommend having though are the balanced form and then the impact core for your Praxic Blade. The impact core is actually what starts the weakening and devour chaining effects that we have with the artifact, so having this allows us to just instantly apply that weakening effect and get the entire chain going. In addition, Balance Form is what allows us to have an increase to our ammo regen, as well as starting health regen on final blows. This is a very easy way to build into survivability of this setup, and again, improve the regen of the Praxic Blade to the point where we're actually regenning more ammo than what we're using. As far as the other 2 weapons, literally use anything. Praxic Blade is the entire focus of this build. And again, with this setup, it has unlimited ammo, deals a ton of damage, has a ton of survivability built into it. It is the focus of this build. So the other 2 weapons can literally be anything. If you want to fit them out to deal with a certain enemy, or if you want to use specific weapons in a specific activity, go ahead and do that. But Praxic Blade is the only thing that's important here. I'm using the refurbished A499 sniper rifle just because it's also a heavy kinetic weapon, meaning it can benefit from the kinetic surges on our boots, which allows it to deal even more damage. So, why not fit it in with a Praxic Blade? Also, being a heavy sniper rifle, it kind of complements the close range playstyle very well by allowing us to quickly deal with any long range enemies. This is the exact same for your energy weapon. I'm going with Compact Defender with destabilizing repulsor brace. This allows us to get easy volatile chains and a quick void overshield if we ever need to swap to it. But again, as you can see from the enemies defeated, from this one and the one I was previously using, I'm really not using this a ton. We are mainly focusing on the Praxic Blade with this setup, and it's what you should be using basically for every single enemy you come across. Again, unless there's something specific you want to use these weapons to counter. All in all, guys, that's the build here for today. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, this is probably one of the strongest builds I've ever made, just because of the pure survivability and damage boost that we can have with our Praxic Blade, and the fact that it's just simply a sword that never needs ammo with this setup. This is a purely offensive-based build with better defensive capabilities than something like a Stronghold setup on Titan. And that's partially why I think this build is so strong and just overall really, really fun to use. As always, let me know down in the comments what you thought of this build for today, as well as any recommendations for future build guides. In addition, the dim link for this build is down in the description. I hope you guys have as much fun with this build as I've been having. This has quickly become one of, if not my favorite build in the entire game. And I'm saying that as a Titan main, so you know this thing is crazy. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate your continued support on these build guides. And as always, have a great day.